Okay, hi everybody. So this is a little bit off the cuff, but I wanted to talk about this. Over the last couple of days, I listened to a couple of Dusty Smith codcasts. I'm a sucker for punishment, but there you go. And I wanted to talk about something because I think I actually have a little bit of common ground with Dusty for once. Before I do, what I maybe should just do is just to signpost you to a discussion I had with Jim over at Atheist Edge the other day for a couple of hours, talking about things relating to YouTube and relating to drama and relating to atheism and religion. I'll sort of gamut of things over 2 hours, and he's put it into two 1 hour videos. I'll put the links in the footnotes if you want to go over there. So Dusty Smith has had a bit of a fallout with BreadTube. And if you're not aware of what BreadTube is, the term comes from, I think they're largely a bunch of either communists, Marxists, or anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists in some cases. And BreadTube comes from Peter Kropotkin's work, The Conquest of Bread, 1890s, folks. But this is cutting-edge economics to some of these people. It's like a top economist sort of deriving everything based on Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations or something such as that. But that's who he's talking to. It's always bread, by the way, isn't it? Have you noticed that? It's always fucking bread with Marxists or anarchists and anarcho-syndicalists. It's like we've solved the bread issue, right? The bread queues aren't there. In the West, I'm not especially rich, but I could fill my fucking house with bread nowadays. We're more interested in technology projects and all these wonderful, fantastic things that we've surrounded our lives and enriched our lives with, and enriched medicine with, and the societies we live in, and how these kind of schemes would solve some of that. In fact, to Dusty's credit, he had a guest who's an anarcho-syndicalist on the second one of these hangouts, and he was kind of touching on some of these issues, how it works. But he didn't really get in terms of tech products. It's always positioned in terms of something very, very fucking basic. I'll make some apples and you can fucking grow some wheat or whatever, And the argument against all this is, well, the capitalist system is just producing stuff in excess. There's more than we need. We're fucking throwing it away, which is a terrible thing. But it's hardly a terrible indictment on the capitalist system when you compare it to most of the communist systems. Now, these are state systems, not syndicalist systems, of course. But nevertheless, these are socialist systems where people were working together. The workers were owning the means of production. And then having enough bread does seem to be an issue. I really don't want to get back to that. I don't want to get back to a system where I'm worrying where my next loaf of fucking bread is coming from. Never mind who is gonna fund and invest the time and energy into all these wonderful things. It just absolutely makes no sense. And it all seems that the guy he was talking to, this isn't even what I was going to make this video on. I'll move on to that in a minute. But the guy he's talking to has such a wonderfully naive yet charming, optimistic outlook on the human condition, as if, well, we're all going to work together and we're all going to pull together. It's all going to be marvellous, and you'll be sharing your wonderful idea with everybody, obviously. And it's just, people just aren't like that. It might work in a little commune where everybody has agreed, yeah, I'm going to join this commune and all work together. Of course it will, because that's all people that want to be part of it. But I'm not going to have the motivation to invest all that extra energy to invent something wonderful, to do something great if I'm not going to get any extra benefit from it. I'm sorry, I'm sufficiently selfish that I'm just not going to do that. And I propose that most people aren't going to do that. They're going to say, I'm sorry, that I could do something else where I'm not working 80, 90 or 100 hours a week for a few years, testing and retesting and refining this idea I've had, when I'm getting no fucking more than anybody else, right? Bollocks to that. I'm doing that on the back that I could properly shoot myself up the ranks that there is something that I can aspire to. And that has been a problem. I know these aren't syndicalist systems, but that has been a problem, of course, in communist countries, which is there's apathy, there's no drive for these things. The only investment you get is investment in military technologies, and that's because that's something that the government is interested in. All the rest of the technologies had to come from other countries, which did have the investment, because it's the capitalist sectors, effectively the free market sectors, that did that. And I think that's, of course, why most people... I can when I listen to Dusty Smith speak, it's obvious that his economics is different to mine. But actually, it's not that far apart. We are both, as most people are, clearly advocates for a mixed economy, where a free market capitalist model probably gives us not perfect solutions, but the best solutions for some products. For some things, there's one of them there. But not for other things. Healthcare is one such thing I would propose, where in Western Europe we've decided that is not a very good model. There may be other things. The provision of water as a service is something Jeremy Corbyn was going to take back into public ownership, and one of the things that I probably agreed with him on, actually, I think that probably should be maybe the railways as well, if not the rolling stock on the railways, at least the track, maybe should be within public ownership, just as effectively the roads are, right? So why wouldn't the railways be? I think that is a fair model for some of the things that we deal with within our societies. But anyway, his big beef, his big fallout with BreadTube wasn't over that. It was because he criticised some of them for not being particularly open with their finances, with how much money that they're earning. And I think he's had a bit of pushback from them on that. But I kind of agree with him in a way. Not that anybody has to be open, but I understood the point. And the reason, this is what sort of made me want to make this video, because it set me thinking. Because he'd mentioned it in two Hangouts running, two codcasts in a row. Which was that the first time that I noticed this, it was the case that if you're on Patreon, you couldn't hide it. It said how many patrons you got and how much you're earning, and that was it. There's no hiding it. And then they allowed you to do so. And initially, I noticed it with some really bigger content producers. I think probably Jordan Peterson was one of the first. And he's getting like $50,000 a month or something extraordinary like that, on top of the money he earns from books and talks and everything else. And I have no problem. It doesn't bother me. I don't get a nosebleed that some people are earning loads and loads. It doesn't really matter that to me as much as it does to some people. But you can understand how that leaves a bad taste in some people's mouth. It seems a little bit of an absurd amount, and that if you're thinking of pledging some money to somebody on Patreon, you may well go along to somebody like Jordan Peterson and think, he's already getting 50 grand, does he really need a couple of dollars a month off me? Whereas there's this other person I like who gets a few $100 a month, I'd be better chipping into them. So you can kind of understand why they would hide that. And they would obviously give other reasons as to why they hid it, but putting my cynical hat on now, I know why if I was in that position I'd be hiding it, right? And it would be because of that. Because I think this large sum is going to discourage people from giving money. And if I would do that, I can't believe that I'm the only terrible person in the world that would think like that. And I don't think that is a terrible way to think. It's just the way it is. And every time I see it, I can't say that's the only reason that people do it. I'm sure there are other legitimate reasons for doing it, but there's always that cynical side of me that thinks, yeah, if you're making quite a bit, I can understand why you're doing it. Even if you're not making that much, if you feel it might dissuade people, then you maybe would hide it. And so he's called out some of these BreadTubers, and I've listened to some of the responses. And quite honestly, I don't buy them. Right now, he says he's bought them, which is unusual, because one of the things with Dusty Smith is He's very hyperbolic and extreme. If you know the history of Dusty Smith, he claims a couple of years back he had this small political change. You're just shifting his emphasis, really. I didn't like the social justice stuff, but I've been focusing on that when Donald Trump's happening and all these other things, and actually they're slightly bigger issues, so I'm going to alter my focus. And this slight altering of focus, right, has led to him, from my perspective, coming from somewhere right over there, this sort of extreme rhetoric on the right type bloke, even though he was on the left, but he's on social issues right over there, and he's just sailed in a matter of months. He sailed straight over my head and landed somewhere down there, which smacks to me of bollocks, but at the same time, the kind of bollocks where I wouldn't expect him not to say something if he really believed it in a situation like this, which surprised me because I listen to those bits of reasoning and I think, well, they smack of the kind of reasoning where if you had 5 reasons for doing something, and the main reason is the one you don't really want to admit to, but the other 4 are part of it, you just talk about the other 4, right? And say, well, there's these reasons, these are the reasons. And yeah, you're not entirely lying because they are part of the reason, but that was a big fucking chunk of the reason as well. But you're just not going to say it. And he's just kind of gone, well, okay, yeah, if that's the reason. But I kind of understand, where he's coming from there. His perspective particularly is that this is a sort of very left-wing area of YouTube where it's kind of frowned upon to be too successful. Yeah, not even just too rich, but too successful. Because if you're sort of successful, your voice might be prioritized above somebody else's voice. And we can't be having a hierarchy of somebody being listened to more than somebody else. My Christ. So there's that, but also there's sort of this looking down upon anybody who earns too much money, etc., etc., etc. So you can kind of understand that, and you can certainly kind of understand that from the perspective of somebody who may want to fund these channels, who would like to be able to assess how much money somebody's getting through Patreon, at least through Patreon if you're thinking of supporting them through Patreon. And of course, it stops that, doesn't it? And so some people have been complaining and saying, look, a little bit more honesty here, a bit more clarity, being a little bit more candid with what you earn would allow us to choose, because there is something to be said for the fact that if you could support a few more content creators of the kind of material you like, that maybe makes some sense, rather than just making 1 or 2 megastars who, yes, they're earning more money. They've gone up from earning $100,000 a year on Patreon to $200,000 a year on Patreon. Whoopee-doo, And there's nothing wrong with earning $200,000 or $2 million a year on Patreon. But as somebody who may be paying you money, you might think, well, yeah, is that I could maybe put my little bit of money with somebody else and we can have more voices. So I kind of get that. And I don't know what to say at the end of it. At the end of it, somebody has the right. I suppose it becomes purchasing power, right? It's the free market at work, even for these fucking BreadTube viewers, which is if you don't like what they are doing, ultimately, in hiding how much they are earning on Patreon, then what you do is give your money to somebody who's making content that you like, that isn't hiding how much money they're making on Patreon, I suppose. Vote with your feet, and maybe if you were supporting that person who's hiding how much money they earn on Patreon, you can always leave on Patreon, if you stop funding someone, you can leave a little, it asks you to leave a little remark as to why it was you've left, and you could put, well, it's because you're not disclosing how much you earn on Patreon, and I'd like that, level of clarity, so you can see what everybody is earning. So anyway, yeah, a sort of rare moment of kind of agreeing, sympathising with Dusty's perspective there, and I just wanted to give my perspective, as it's a subject that I've thought about before. I'd noted this, not particularly with BreadTubers, but just generally. As soon as that facility came along on Patreon to disguise how much people were earning. It's amazing how many people took it up, especially people who are earning quite a lot. And I can quite understand why people would do it. And I can also quite understand why people who would do it, when asked why they did it, would give other reasons as to why they would do it. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm just being overly cynical, but I just think that's what's going on in this instance. Okay, bit off the cuff, bit rambly, sorry about that. If you want to listen to me talking to somebody else, it's a little bit less rambly. Like I say, I'll put the link to those 2 videos where I have a chat with Jim at Atheist Edge in the footnotes. Okay, thanks for watching, and bye.